Hello, wonderful humans. I'm here in my garden, and it's the autumn time, so I'm able to enjoy the fruit of my orchard, which is fantastic. I was reflecting on the importance for me in on the idea of the seasonal process and magic. So, as somebody who kind of grew up or raised myself within the kind of neo-pagan tradition, the Wheel of the Year, those 8 Sabbats, those 8 festivals, however ancient or modern we might imagine them to be, are things that are really important in my mind. And more broadly, the kind of the flow of the ritual year, which of course is expressed in pretty much every culture. As humans, we mark time, and we mark, as well as our kind of calendar time. For me, the idea of like responding to what's happening in the landscape is really important. There's this idea of the magician as this dude who stands in a circle bellowing commands at the universe. And that's all very well, and that may be part of the story. But also the magician exists within a context. This isn't that, it isn't as simple as there being like a kind of isolate self that's demanding results of the world, because the self that does that demanding arises as a result of the world. There's a reciprocity, a relationship, a connection between those two things. To not think that that's the case is to commit a sort of Descartes' error. So for me, as a magician, as an esoteric practitioner, listening to what the season asks of me or evokes in me is really important. So as I do various pieces of magical work, they tend to tie in or flow with the season, and the style of them tends to be appropriate to the season. So in the spring, you've got, in the landscape that I inhabit, the British Isles, that kind of outward pushing, amazing eruption of kind of energy and life. In the winter time, the autumn time, as we're in, as I'm recording this, there's that kind of pulling in, that withdrawing. And so the work that I do and the styles of work that I do tend to follow that. So at the moment I've been doing, unsurprisingly, given that as I'm recording this, it's around November time, lots of work with like ancestors and lineage and what one of my teachers calls the kind of retinue of spirits that we have within us and around us. And I've been doing other work which has been about kind of focusing on slowly building things in the dark, rather than kind of big expressive types of magic. And I think this is about an analogy that I've used previously, which is to do with being sensitive to the tide. So as a magician, as a practitioner, as a person, it's important to listen to what the tide is doing, to be aware of that, to observe that. Because it doesn't matter how fabulous our intention is, or how fantastic our technique is, or how radical our form of sorcery is. If we're setting sail, to use that metaphor, at a time when the tide is out, we're not going to get very far. So however well constructed our idea, it's not going to happen. And being able to be sensitive to the season is really vital for that. I know that there's something of a kind of joke within chaos magic that astrology is nonsense. Pete Carroll certainly has a bit of a downer on it. But I think that what astrology and all those other kind of ideas point to is this notion that we are also individually subject to all these influences. And so the best thing to do as a practitioner, rather than to try and move against them, is to figure out how to flow with them. And this is where for me, the magical tradition of the West kind of tips over into this really interesting kind of Taoist type position. So rather than it being like a striving towards results, it's actually more about learning to place oneself elegantly in the flow of the universe, and to use that for the benefit of oneself and ideally all other beings. Thank you very much for listening.